Leonard thought he had done everything right. After 40 years working as an electrical engineer, he finally moved into a quiet retirement community in Scottsdale, Arizona. His mortgage was gone. His retirement accounts looked solid, and for the first time in decades, life felt predictable. Like many Americans, Leonard believed retirement would simply be a slower, easier chapter of the same financial story. But a few months after leaving work, he began noticing something unsettling. The numbers that once looked comfortable suddenly started asking much harder questions. And that's when Leonard discovered a truth about retirement most people only realize when it's already too late. Hi, Ted here. Just a quick note before we start. I'm not a financial expert. I'm simply a guy who likes breaking down money ideas with simple examples so they're easier to understand. Over the years, I've noticed something interesting whenever people talk about retirement. Most conversations sound calm, even reassuring. People picture retirement as the moment when financial stress finally fades away. The mortgage is paid off. The kids are grown. Work becomes optional instead of necessary. And after decades of saving, many people feel like the hardest part is finally behind them. On paper, the plan usually looks reasonable. There might be a retirement account, maybe a 401k or an IRA built over many years. Social Security will eventually start arriving each month. When those pieces are added together, the picture can feel stable enough to relax. But retirement doesn't happen on paper. It happens in real life, where prices change. Healthcare becomes more important, and the timeline of your money suddenly stretches much further than most people expected. And that's where many retirement plans quietly start to struggle. Because the assumptions people used when they built those plans often stop matching reality years later. What once felt comfortable can slowly begin to feel uncertain. After hearing dozens of retirement stories, I started noticing the same pattern again and again. Behind many retirement plans are a few uncomfortable truths that rarely show up in the brochures or the optimistic conversations. And once you start looking closely, you realize those truths shape almost every retirement story. Today, I want to walk through 6 of them. The first uncomfortable truth about retirement is that savings often look larger than they really are. When people glance at their retirement account, they usually see a single number. Maybe it's a few $100,000. Maybe it's more. And that number can create a powerful feeling of security. But that number by itself doesn't tell the full story. Because retirement isn't a moment. It's a timeline. If someone retires at 65, their money may need to last 25 or even 30 years. Suddenly, the question isn't how large the number looks today. The real question becomes how long that number can support a life. Imagine spreading a large amount of money across 3 decades of living expenses. Housing, food insurance, transportation, and everyday life still continue. When people begin thinking about their savings in terms of years instead of just a total balance, the picture can start to feel very different. And that leads directly to the second uncomfortable truth. Social Security often replaces far less income than people expect. Many workers assume that Social Security will cover most of their basic living expenses once they stop working. It feels like a safety net that will naturally fill the gap. But in reality, Social Security was designed to replace only a portion of a worker's income, not all of it. That means the rest of retirement spending must come from personal savings. And when people begin comparing their previous income to what Social Security actually provides, they often realize the gap is larger than they imagined. So the first 2 truths already change the way retirement looks. Savings must last far longer than many people expect, and Social Security may cover less of the journey than people originally believed. And once those 2 ideas become clear, the rest of the retirement puzzle starts to look very different. The third uncomfortable truth about retirement is inflation. Inflation rarely feels dramatic in a single year. Prices move slowly enough that most people barely notice the change month to month. But retirement planning doesn't happen over 1 year. It happens across decades. And over long periods of time, small changes in prices can quietly reshape an entire retirement plan. Imagine a simple example. A household that spends about $60,000 per year in retirement today might feel comfortable with that number. It covers housing costs, groceries, insurance, and everyday living. But if prices rise gradually, over time, the same lifestyle becomes more expensive year after year. What costs $60,000 today might require closer to $80,000 or even $90,000 many years later, depending on how prices evolve. This doesn't happen overnight. That's what makes inflation so easy to underestimate. It moves slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. But over 20 or 30 years, it can reshape the purchasing power of savings in ways that surprise many retirees. And that leads directly to the fourth uncomfortable truth. Healthcare costs often rise at the exact moment when people expect their expenses to fall. Many workers imagine retirement as a period where spending naturally decreases. Commuting disappears. Work clothes become unnecessary. Some daily expenses shrink. But healthcare tends to move in the opposite direction. As people grow older, medical needs usually increase rather than decrease. Insurance premiums, prescriptions, routine checkups, and unexpected treatments can all become part of the retirement budget. This doesn't mean retirement automatically becomes financially unstable. But it does mean that the spending pattern many people imagine often looks very different in reality. Instead of expenses steadily falling, some of the most important costs begin rising later in life. And when inflation and healthcare combine over a long retirement timeline, they quietly change the math behind even the most carefully planned retirement strategy. The fifth uncomfortable truth about retirement is that people often underestimate how long retirement can actually last. For most of modern history, retirement was relatively short. People stopped working in their mid-60s, and many only expected their savings to last 10 or 15 years. But the world has changed. Life expectancy has gradually increased, and millions of retirees today are living much longer than previous generations. Reaching 85 or 90 is no longer unusual, and that completely changes the timeline of retirement. If someone retires at 65 and lives to 90, that means their retirement lasts 25 years. In some cases, it can stretch even longer. Now think about what that really means financially. A retirement plan isn't simply about having enough money when you stop working. It's about making sure that money can support an entire lifestyle for decades. Housing, food insurance, transportation, and healthcare continue year after year, and each of those expenses exists inside the environment. We already discussed an environment where inflation quietly increases prices over time. So the real challenge isn't just saving money. The real challenge is designing savings that can survive a very long timeline. And that's where many people run into trouble. Their retirement plans were designed for 15 or 20 years, but reality may require those same resources to stretch much further. When that happens, the pressure on every financial decision increases. Because once retirement begins, the ability to rebuild savings through work often becomes much more limited. And that leads directly to the sixth and final uncomfortable truth. The sixth uncomfortable truth about retirement is that the biggest risk is not always running out of money. Sometimes the bigger risk is losing flexibility. Many retirement plans are built around a single projection, a certain spending level, a certain investment return, a certain timeline. On paper, everything fits together neatly, but real life rarely follows a single projection. Markets move, prices change, health situations evolve, family circumstances shift, and over a retirement that may last 25 or 30 years, those changes can happen many times. When a plan is too rigid, even small changes can create stress. For example, imagine someone who plans to withdraw the exact same amount of money every year, regardless of market conditions. In a strong market, that may work smoothly. But during a downturn, withdrawing the same amount can slowly place more pressure on the remaining savings. This is why many experienced retirees focus less on perfect predictions and more on adaptability. Instead of assuming every year will look the same, they build room to adjust. That might mean reviewing spending from time to time and identifying which expenses are flexible and which are essential. It might mean periodically revisiting the retirement plan as circumstances evolve. Flexibility doesn't eliminate uncertainty, but it gives people options when unexpected events appear. And in a retirement that could last decades, options are often one of the most valuable resources a person can have. Because retirement planning is not about predicting the future perfectly. It's about preparing for a future that will almost certainly change. If you step back and look at the bigger picture, retirement isn't simply a finish line. It's a long financial journey that begins the moment work stops. Leonard Briggs eventually realized that nothing about his retirement plan was necessarily wrong. The savings were real. The accounts were there. Social Security would still arrive each month. But the way those pieces interact over time is what truly shapes retirement. Savings must last longer than many people expect. Social Security may cover less of daily life than it appears. Inflation slowly changes the value of money. Healthcare costs tend to rise later in life. Retirement itself may stretch across 25 or even 30 years. And the plans that survive that long journey are usually the ones built with flexibility. These uncomfortable truths aren't meant to scare anyone. They're meant to encourage better questions. Questions like how long savings might actually need to last, how spending might evolve over time, and how flexible a retirement plan really is when life changes. Because retirement isn't just about reaching a number. It's about understanding how that number supports an entire chapter of life. If this conversation made you think differently about retirement, I'd be curious to hear your perspective in the comments. And if you enjoy thoughtful discussions like this about money and long-term decisions, consider subscribing and joining the conversation in future videos. Thank you, everyone.